It was nearly dusk when the stranger arrived. No name, no luggage. Just a pair of weathered sandals and hands that looked like they hadn't held anything in years. He stood at the edge of the village, near the rice fields, staring at the workshop with the carved phoenix on its wooden gate. Old Master Joan was sitting outside, shaping a block of rosewood into a ceremonial bowl. He didn't look up. "You're lost," he said simply, not as a question, but as fact. The man nodded. "I was told to come here." "By whom?" Master Joan asked. "By silence," the man answered. And something in that sentence made Joan set down his chisel. For a long moment, nothing moved, only the soft sound of birds settling into their nests. "Sit," Joan said, gesturing to the bench beside him. The man did. No more words passed, just the hush of wood being shaped. But later that night, as the fire flickered low, Master Joan finally asked, "Why are your hands empty?" The man looked down, as if surprised by the question. "Because everything I touched, I broke." There was no pity in Joan's eyes, only recognition. "Then, maybe it's time," he said, "to learn how to carve something that holds. If stories like this stir something deep in your spirit, something worn but waiting, subscribe to Woodcarving Artist. Here, every piece begins not with perfection, but with a fracture. The next morning, the man returned, still silent, still empty-handed. But when Joan handed him a block of wood, he didn't hesitate. He held it like it might shatter, gently, as if for the first time in years, he was holding something worth keeping. Joan watched him quietly. "This," he said, "is not about craft. It's about listening." And the man nodded, not because he understood, but because he wanted to. If you've ever felt like a stranger to yourself, like your own hands forgot how to build, how to mend, then this journey is yours too. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and walk with us. Not toward mastery, but meaning. The days that followed passed without instruction. No lectures, no diagrams, no, "This is how you hold a chisel." Master Joan believed that words could only take a man so far. The real lessons lived in the silence between gestures. So the stranger swept the workshop floor each morning, carefully avoiding the wood shavings that looked too deliberate to discard. He watched the old man carve in long, flowing lines, pausing not because he doubted, but because he listened. To the grain, to the blade, to the breath inside the wood itself. The stranger began to understand that carving wasn't just about shaping wood. It was about shaping attention. He learned how to recognize the rhythm of the tools, the sigh a board makes when it's finally accepted its fate, the difference between forcing a form and inviting it to appear. One evening, Master Joan pointed to a piece of black walnut lying in the corner. "It's stubborn," he said, "like fear. If you rush it, it splits. But if you wait, it speaks." The stranger picked it up and nodded. That was the first time he touched wood without flinching. If you've ever had to relearn how to trust your own hands, to move gently through the world again, Woodcarving Artist is where your healing begins. Subscribe now and walk with us one patient breath at a time. The stranger began carving small things: the curve of a leaf, the beak of a bird, the edge of a bowl. None of it was perfect, but in each shape there was honesty, a kind of trembling truth that made Joan quietly smile. "You're not fixing anything," he said once. "You're witnessing." The stranger didn't respond. He didn't need to. His hands were no longer empty. They were full of effort, of hope, of reverence. And that was enough. If you're still with us, still feeling this slow, gentle unfolding, then you're part of the story. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist. Let your quiet journey find its reflection in ours. It happened quietly, almost too quietly to notice. The stranger was shaping a thin rice spoon, his first attempt at something functional. The grain was tight, the curve was smooth, but then, crack. A small fissure ran down the handle like a sudden scar. He froze. For a long time, he just stared at it, not moving, not breathing. Master Joan looked over, eyes soft. "It's still a spoon," he said calmly, but the stranger shook his head. "It's broken." "So are we," Joan replied, "but we still carry." The words sat in the air for a moment, before sinking deep into the stranger's chest. He had tried to be careful. He had followed every motion. But maybe it wasn't about avoiding the cracks. Maybe it was about learning how to live with them. That night, under the warm light of a single oil lamp, Joan brought out a small box. Inside it were dozens of cracked carvings, spoons, bowls, birds, and even an old flute with a split down its middle. "These aren't failures," he whispered. "These are memories." And one by one, he showed the stranger how each imperfection had led to something new, something truer. "You don't carve to erase," he said. "You carve to reveal." If that speaks to your heart, if you've ever looked at your scars and wondered if they still matter, subscribe to Woodcarving Artist. These stories are for you. The next day, the stranger picked up his broken spoon again, but instead of discarding it, he traced the crack gently, then carved a vine through it. The flaw became part of the design, not hidden, but honored. When Joan saw it, he simply nodded. "Now it's yours." And from that day on, the stranger began keeping a small collection of broken things. Not because he failed, but because each one reminded him that even damage can be beautiful. If you're still walking with us, still finding your own rhythm in these quiet truths, subscribe to Woodcarving Artist. Here, even the cracks are part of the craft. One afternoon, Master Joan took down a dusty box from the top shelf, a box the stranger had never seen him touch before. Inside was a block of tamarind wood, aged and dry, still uncarved. Joan ran his fingers over it with surprising tenderness. "I was supposed to carve this 10 years ago," he said softly. "It was meant to be a wedding gift for my daughter." The stranger stayed silent, sensing the weight behind the words. Joan continued. "She passed away before the ceremony. Fever took her. Fast." He didn't speak with tears, only with time. "Since then, I haven't been able to touch this wood. It's like it's been waiting for something. Or someone." The stranger looked at the block, then at Joan. "Why show me now?" Joan smiled faintly. "Because your hands are no longer empty." That night, the two of them sat together, the block between them. No plan, no sketches, just presence. They didn't carve to finish. They carved to remember. Each stroke was a whisper of something left unsaid. A memory, a promise, a prayer. Slowly, the bowl took shape. Not perfectly round, not evenly smooth, but filled with something no tool could shape. Devotion. If you've ever lost someone and kept their gift unfinished in the corners of your soul, then Woodcarving Artist is here to walk that journey with you. Subscribe now and let memory become something you can hold. When it was done, Joan placed the bowl on the altar beside a faded photo of his daughter. He didn't cry. He just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the rim. "She would have liked this," he whispered. The stranger stood beside him, quiet, respectful, not trying to fix, just witnessing. That's what woodcarving had become for him. Not creating, but allowing. allowing grief, allowing joy, allowing space for both to live side by side. If you've made it this far, it means these stories matter to you too. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist. Together, we carve not just objects, but meaning. One afternoon, Master Joan took down a dusty box from the top shelf. A box the stranger had never seen him touch before. Inside was a block of tamarind wood, aged and dry, still uncarved. Joan ran his fingers over it with surprising tenderness. "I was supposed to carve this 10 years ago," he said softly. "It was meant to be a wedding gift for my daughter." The stranger stayed silent, sensing the weight behind the words. Joan continued. "She passed away before the ceremony. Fever took her. Fast." He didn't speak with tears, only with time. "Since then, I haven't been able to touch this wood. It's like it's been waiting for something. Or someone." The stranger looked at the block, then at Joan. "Why show me now?" Joan smiled faintly. "Because your hands are no longer empty." That night, the two of them sat together, the block between them. No plan, no sketches, just presence. They didn't carve to finish. They carved to remember. Each stroke was a whisper of something left unsaid. A memory, a promise, a prayer. Slowly, the bowl took shape. Not perfectly round, not evenly smooth, but filled with something no tool could shape. Devotion. If you've ever lost someone and kept their gift unfinished in the corners of your soul, then Woodcarving Artist is here to walk that journey with you. Subscribe now and let memory become something you can hold. When it was done, Joan placed the bowl on the altar beside a faded photo of his daughter. He didn't cry. He just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the rim. "She would have liked this," he whispered. The stranger stood beside him, quiet, respectful, not trying to fix, just witnessing. That's what woodcarving had become for him. Not creating, but allowing. Allowing grief, allowing joy, allowing space for both to live side by side. If you've made it this far, it means these stories matter to you too. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist. Together, we carve not just objects, but meaning. She arrived just before the rain, a girl no older than 10, soaked from the shoulders down, with a small satchel and eyes that didn't flinch. But she said nothing, not a word. She stood at the edge of the doorway, watching the stranger sand the rim of a bowl. Master Joan noticed her too, but said nothing. He had learned that sometimes the best welcome is silence. After a long pause, the girl stepped forward and pulled something from her satchel. A small wooden flute, split clean down the middle. She held it out with both hands, eyes wide with hope. But still, not a single sound left her lips. Joan gently took the flute, examining the crack. Then he looked at her, his voice low. "Was this yours?" The girl nodded. "Can I show you how we mend what sings?" She nodded again. That evening, the stranger and Joan worked side by side under the flickering light, teaching the girl through hands, not words. They showed her how to clean the break, how to warm the wood just enough to open it, then seal it with love, not glue. And when the flute was whole again, they let her play the first note. It was soft, a little off-key, but real. And in that moment, the girl smiled for the first time. No voice, but her soul sang. If this touched you, even just a little, take a moment and subscribe to Woodcarving Artist. These aren't just stories. They're echoes of something we all carry. Over the following days, she returned again and again, still quiet, still small, but always with her flute. Sometimes she'd carve tiny birds beside the stranger. Other times, she'd sit beside Master Joan and hand him tools before he even asked. It was as if silence had found its chorus. "Not everyone needs to speak," Joan whispered one evening. "Some people carve their voice into the wood." If you've ever struggled to find your own way of expressing what words fail to say, then Woodcarving Artist was made for you. Subscribe now. Let the grain carry your voice. The storm came without warning. A sheet of lightning split the sky, followed by the roar of wind and the unmistakable scent of wet earth. The village scattered. Doors slammed, chickens fluttered, and the little girl with the flute was nowhere in sight. Inside the workshop, Master Joan quickly covered the drying lacquer bowls while the stranger moved the chisels and sanding tools to safety. But something wasn't right. Smoke. Faint, but rising from the corner where the old pile of shavings had been swept too close to the ember box. Joan rushed forward, stamping the edges, smothering it with damp cloth. The stranger froze, not because he didn't know what to do, but because for a flash of a second, he saw the fire from his childhood, the fire that had destroyed his father's carpentry shed, that smell, that fear. It returned like an old wound reopened. Joan turned. "It's not the same fire," he said softly. "This one doesn't want to take. It's reminding you of what you saved." And somehow, that made all the difference. The stranger took a deep breath, then another, and together they cleared the smoke, one slow movement at a time. No damage, just ashes, just memory. If this moment stirred something in you, something old, something buried, then subscribe to Woodcarving Artist, because sometimes healing looks like standing still in the smoke and not running. Later that night, the little girl returned, flute in hand, eyes wide with worry. But when she saw the stranger still sitting by the door, sanding wood with steady hands, she smiled, and in her smile, something shifted. The stranger realized he hadn't flinched when he touched the flame-darkened table. Not because he was fearless, but because he had faced it and stayed. "Some fires come to burn," Joan said quietly. "Others come to reveal what survived." If you've ever walked through a storm, literal or otherwise, and found yourself still here, still carving, then Woodcarving Artist is your home. Subscribe now. Let the ashes become the beginning. They began working on it in silence, a long, solid bench from reclaimed rosewood full of knots and hidden strength. It wasn't for sale. It wasn't for anyone. And yet, each of them knew exactly what it was for. The stranger shaped the edges, rounding the corners with calm care. The girl carved the ends with birds and wildflowers, each mark delicate and full of childhood wonder. Master Joan added one detail, a single line across the backrest, deep and slightly curved, as if someone had once leaned into it for comfort. For days, they didn't speak of why they were building it. But in the quiet, it became clear. This was not just a bench. It was a tribute to time, to patience, to the parts of ourselves we share with no words. They didn't name it at first, but one morning, the girl placed her flute gently on the seat and whispered, "For the ones who lost their voice." Later, the stranger added a carving of a crack, gently filled with gold dust resin, for the ones who broke and kept going. And that night, Joan traced the grain along the seat, closing his eyes, for the ones who waited and were finally seen. 3 names, 1 bench, no ceremony, just understanding, just grace. If you've ever carried more than you could say and still kept showing up, then this story is also yours. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and let each detail carve a little piece into your day. When the bench was finished, they didn't place it in the workshop. They carried it, carefully, to the edge of the rice fields, where the breeze always felt like a song. There it sat, a quiet witness to three souls who found healing not through talking, but through wood, patience, and shared silence. The girl sat first, playing a soft tune. Then the stranger joined, hands resting on knees, watching the horizon. Finally, Joan, old hands folded in lap, heart light. "This is what we make," he said. "Not just benches, not just bowls. We make space for people to rest." If that's what you're searching for, a place to rest, even for a moment, subscribe now to Woodcarving Artist. This bench, this story, it was made with you in mind.